All right, let's give everybody a minute to trickle in here. How we doing? Thanks for joining the event today and sticking around. For those of you who have been with us from the beginning, you are joining the panel on how to improve sales team productivity and performance. We've got a panel full of expertise here to bestow their wisdom. Give it just another minute or so. This would be a good time for Cory to tell one of his jokes while we give it maybe just one more minute.
Oh, no, we're not doing jokes today.
No, we're not doing jokes. All right.
Well, let's see. Do we have anything that's good? That's no. Nothing clean enough for people I don't know.
Fair enough. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. And I'm sure more folks are going to be trickling in here as we get going, but they'll catch up. So again, this panel is about how to improve sales team productivity and performance. And in a lot of ways, B2B sales has gotten more challenging today than ever before. While buyers prefer to spend less time with sellers, reps are struggling to navigate the increasingly complex sales cycle on the other end. And so I've said this already, but I'll say it again. We couldn't have a better panel of sales experienced professionals here to discuss how teams can combat that, how they can continue to be productive and continue to perform irregardless of these these challenges that stand in front of them. So we'll go around the horn here. We'll start with Steph for an introduction, and then we'll jump into some of the questions. Steph.
Hey everyone, nice to be here. Glad that you're joining us today. Like Ross said, my name is Steph Sanders. I work for a company called Contractbook. We are a Danish-based company based in Copenhagen. I don't know if you've ever been to Copenhagen. It's one of the coolest cities though that I've ever visited. So highly recommend if you're planning a Europe trip. But we work with companies, SMB, mid-market size, to help streamline and automate their contract processes. So, try to get those contracts over the line and signed as quickly as possible, which obviously helps with productivity. I manage our sales function for North America, and I've been here about 2 years. So that's just a little bit about me. I've been in sales and business development, my entire career, but excited to be here and share some things I've learned along the way.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Justin.
Hey, everyone. Grateful for the opportunity to be here. My name is Justin J. Johnson. I'm the founder and creator of the beautiful Savage Sales Academy. Former #1 rep at Salesforce, scaled a couple of startups, was recently chief revenue officer, and named one of the top CROs in tech. But I retired from the game. And now what I do is I coach sales reps and sales leaders how to make more money, get promoted faster without burning out. And that's what I do. So I'm excited to be here because this is right up my alley.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a huge need for what you're doing. Excited to see what you're building there, Justin. And Cory.
Hi, I'm Cory Bray, co-founder of CoachCRM. We're a software company that helps sales managers get more out of their teams, and it helps executives get more out of their frontline sales managers. A lot of times sales managers were promoted from salesperson. They were never trained in management. We're never trained in sales management. We're never trained in coaching. And so all of a sudden people are just doing what they feel is the right thing to do, which, sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Frameworks and structure help. And I'm going to be giving away a big giveaway at the end of this thing. I'm also a founder of Closed Loop Sales Training Enablement firm for folks that are struggling, which is putting the basic foundations in place. And I've written 8 books. Number 9 is coming out later this year.
Very good. Sounds good. So you've definitely got a depth of knowledge to share with us today. And I actually feel like maybe that was me who you're building CoachCRM for. I was probably a terrible first-time manager when I moved from rep to a frontline sales manager. So love what you guys are building over there as well. All right. So in simple terms, sales productivity is the measure of how efficiently and effectively a sales team converts activities to revenue, right? But the concept can embody a lot of different things depending on where you sit, whether you're an individual contributor, you're talking about productivity, frontline sales manager, or CRO. And so let's start with the question of, just to get an understanding of, what is sales productivity and how does it impact performance? And for this, we'll start with Stephanie, and we'll go Stephanie, Justin, and Cory. Stephanie.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with, the definition, basically how effectively, efficiently the resources that are at a team's disposal are being used. So all of that is going to directly impact, obviously, the KPIs that everyone's being measured on with win rates and sales cycle lengths and ACV and all of that. But I think what it really comes down to is how you're able to make the most of what you have. I mean, I think everyone today understands that leads aren't as abundant as they used to be. Outbound's a hell of a lot harder than it used to be. And so everything counts almost double, triple what it used to in the conversations that you're having. And so being able to make sure that the conversions are where they need to be, and being able to coach to, if a rep seems to be off balance, somewhere in their pipeline, using that as a diagnostic to go in and work with them and make sure things are getting back on track so that you're not, not taking advantage of what you have and what you're able to be working in the pipeline. So, I think it all mostly comes down to math at the end of the day. That's one of the things I like the most about sales. I don't think I'd want to be in a career where everything was so much outside of the control of what you're able to manage as a rep or a manager or a leader. And so just really driving, the right activities, the right metrics, the right kind of process based on what you're seeing with the numbers.
Yeah. I think that's a really great way to look at it. It's focusing on what you control. What are those different variables that a rep control, a manager control, and then from a top-down approach. Justin, I'd be curious to hear from your perspective, both as recently as CRO and now working with sales reps on the coaching side too.
I mean, the way I think about productivity is extremely simple. It's output per unit of time. So let's think about it this way. If you have an hour, there's only so much you can get done in the hour, right? So productivity comes down to how much leverage can I apply to that hour so that I can maximize my output. Because what leads to a lot of burnout for a lot of people is they measure how hard they work based on how many hours they put in the day, right? Now, don't get me wrong, you got to bust your butt. You have to be successful in whatever you do. But you also need to understand the concept of leverage. You need to understand how to squeeze more out of each unit of time that you have, right? Because I don't care how many hours that you work. I care about your outputs as a leader and as a rep. That's how you should measure yourself, right? You work 4 hours a day, get it all done, great, right? I don't care, go golfing, right? That's what productivity comes down to for me. And how does it correlate to performance? I mean, it is performance, right? It's one and the same. If you're not productive, right, then you're not performing. And productive is not the same as busy. I don't care if you're doing a bunch of stuff all day long. I care about what comes of your inputs. And that's how I think about your productivity.
Yeah, I think you said it really well there, because it's about what you put in productivity, and you're focused on the outcomes, which is in essence the performance of it all. So I think that's a good way to say it. Cory, anything that you would add?
Yeah, I think Justin's right in the world where you've got fixed assets. So when you look at a person, their productivity is based on the hour. But when you zoom out and look at the company, it's based on the dollar, because the dollar dictates the number of hours and the number of people or assets that you would have. And I also think that Steph nailed it with the word math, because that's what I was thinking too. It's hilarious. You always see these people say like, oh, you shouldn't have to go to college to be in sales. Well, by the time you get sales leadership, first thing that comes to my mind is second derivative. So I want to understand what's the second derivative of the incremental dollar spent. And if you don't know what that means, then you're not going to be able to have a peer-to-peer conversation with the CFO. And you're going to be like, oh, I have a glass ceiling and I can't talk to finance. They don't take me seriously because I'm just a dumb sales guy, right? And that's what ends up happening, because, the people that are trying to promote themselves are out there be like, oh, college is stupid. You don't need college. So here's how it breaks down for me, is that the biggest question to answer is, where should I put my next dollar? And it starts with, should I put a next dollar somewhere? And then within which department? And then within the department, is it within people? Is it within process, technology? Is it consultants? What is it? And then because the thing is that the hour is important, but if you think about next year, do I want to go in and do talent arbitrage and hire junior people and train them up? Cool. So that gives me a different profile in terms of productivity on an hour by hour basis. Or do I spend more money now and get people that are just ready to rock, that know how to sell in this market, that know how to sell to this persona, and potentially even know how to sell this product? Well, I know I'm going to be able to get a much higher productivity per hour in that case. So now I've got this trade-off, and then I look at things like career pathing and risk of them leaving and all of those other things. And so I think that really it all boils down to, people talk about sales and marketing alignment, how important it is. Whatever, sales and finance alignment is way more important. And this conversation right here, everything everybody's hitting on has nothing to do with anything else other than sales and finance alignment of how do we get the most out of every incremental dollar that we're investing in the company, and understand, should we invest more? And yeah, that goes back to calculus, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately for those of us who didn't do well in math, maybe. It's an interesting idea. So, you mentioned those two scenarios. You can afford to hire some reps maybe with less experience, but they're going to be slower to get to productivity because of a longer ramp. Or you could maybe invest more and hire the reps that have the experience, and they're going to get to productivity faster. Which I think is an interesting decision point for folks who are building out their sales team.
If you hire the junior folks, then you got to hire enablement. Who you're hiring for enablement? A lot of companies are hiring people who have never done it more than once or twice before, and now you're training them. And so now you've got a copy of a copy, training a copy of a copy, and then where do you end up?
Yeah, it almost it starts to compound, right? Another math term that I think most of us are familiar with, at least. Yeah. So we've talked about a couple of things that you could use to measure and track productivity, but we'll start with Steph here again at the top, and we'll start to maybe pull out some specific metrics that sales leaders and teams can use to track their productivity. Steph, what do you think?
I think you're gonna, I don't think anyone needs to be told the typical, activity metrics, conversion metrics, like step by step in the funnel. But kind of like I said in the first question, like, use all of that as the baseline of, your normal rep versus industry standards versus, what you should be expecting. Use it as the diagnostic for knowing what to work on with them, and focus, how you're developing and changing and pivoting sales process and playbook based on what you're seeing and changes that you're seeing. And so, I do think conversion rates are probably one of the more important metrics, though, because that's kind of showing, your batting average, if you will, where it's not just, okay, you had this many calls this week, or you did this many demos this week. It's like, what did you do with the ones that you had? How many hits did you get? How many times did you get on base? And so I think that's first and foremost. And then, kind of related to metrics and the typical things that you always hear people tracking: calls, dials, conversations, emails, proposals sent, like, et cetera, et cetera. What I see lacking most of the time is any sort of measure of like reciprocity coming back from the prospect. You can talk to a rep and they'll say, oh yeah, I'm on top of that op. Like, I've sent 10 emails and made 8 calls, but how many times did they pick up? How many times did they respond? I think like the closer that ratio is to 1-to-1, the much higher likelihood that that's an engaged buyer and an opportunity that has potential. And I think, when all you're looking at is like those input level activities and metrics, you really miss like what's actually going on in the deal. And so as best you can to measure whatever that sort of reciprocity back and forth, input from one rep to output from the prospect, like that really shows the actual place that an opportunity could be.
That's a really a great point. And, leading a team of, how many reps are on your team today?
There's about 8 of us in the US right now.
Okay, so with 8 reps across the US, and not necessarily to promote any necessarily tools, but do you have a way that you're able to see what that engagement a seller has with a buyer throughout their sales process looks like?
We're in the process of making a switch to Salesforce. I think stuff like this is going to be a little bit easier to measure and more of a report then. But right now, it's just a lot of spot checking the CRM and, understanding it in conversations with the reps and everything, what's going on. At previous organizations, We've done things like sort of exception reporting where like we know, okay, these are the typical things that you need to be doing at this point in the funnel. Like if it's gone over 3 days and you haven't, like what's the reason why, to kind of call out those red flags and everything. And so, as best you can through tech to monitor it, even better. But at a baseline, it's something that you just need to be doing, through other ways if you can't.
Yeah, like it's certainly a point of conversation during deal reviews and things like that to keep a finger on the pulse. And Justin, earlier you mentioned the importance of time in all of this. Did you have any other metrics or things that you would use to track overall productivity related to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways I look at this equation here. One is kind of building on what Steph was just saying. Second is another KPI that's not as commonly tracked for leaders. But to hit on what Steph was saying, I mean, if you're getting in your car, you don't get into a car without knowing what your destination is, right? It's either you put it in the GPS or you know how to get there by heart. So if you do that in your personal life, why don't you do that in your professional life by having a clear understanding of what it takes to get someone from cradle to grave in a sales cycle? Everyone talks about the need to know the steps to your process and track it. But time and time again, when I'm meeting with sales leaders and sales reps, if there's sales reps, you listen in here, you're not excused from this equation because so many people don't really know their numbers. They conceptually grasp the concept of knowing your funnel, but they don't know their numbers when I ask, well, what are your conversion rates? So take the time to do the boring stuff. Extraordinary people and extraordinary businesses, all they do is they do the ordinary extra. The boring, unsexy stuff is what separates them, right? Now, so take the time, as brutal and as tedious and as not fun as it is, get your numbers in line, right? So that's where you know your end destination, you know your GPS. That's the first thing. Second thing, the way I think about a non-traditional KPI is that I would measure with reps, anyone that was on my team, is I measured time on task. So I would literally pull up the calendar and we would measure week by week how much time were they actually spending doing revenue generating activities, right? And meeting creep is real. People love to throw meetings on the calendar for no reason at all. That could have been handled in an email or a Slack. So time on task is a great way, to hold myself accountable as a leader to make sure I'm protecting my rep's calendar because I feel like that's part of my responsibilities. And then number two, also hold myself accountable, making sure my time on task is in the right areas. So there's not like a tool or a CRM that gives that for you. Just look at the calendar, color code it, and that's going to give you a sense of, all right, how much time am I spending on things that aren't actually moving the needle for the business? So that's how I look at it.
Yeah. I like that concept of listing out your revenue generating activities, especially from a rep perspective. I think that it's really easy to get sucked into a lot of time wasting activities. And so I think that's a really good call out. If there are any reps in the audience, that's definitely something you can do today to start moving the needle. Cory, from your perspective, what sort of things are you guys working on as far as how you train managers to track productivity?
Well, you need to know all the metrics. And here's the thing, right? If you want to be good. So if you don't need to be good, you don't need to know all the metrics. And the analogy I like to use is golf. So you can be okay at golf if you can hit a driver, 7-iron, you can chip and you can putt, right? You can be fine. But you're not going to be great unless you can get out of the fairway bunker, the greenside bunker, if you can get out from behind a tree, if you can hit into a 30-mile-an-hour wind, if you can hit it low, if you can bump and run. And if you can putt on fast greens, slow greens, putt after it's been there, there's so many different variables, right? And there's metrics in sales that are a good analogy for each one of those. So if we look at win rate, deal size, stage conversions, quote attainment, those types of things, yeah, sure, whatever. That's great. Everybody knows that. Finance knows that. So like sales doesn't even have to worry about it because like they're like, hey, here it is. It's top low. Woohoo. Right. And then I love the things about the calendar. Calendar's awesome. Like that's a great place to look. But if you don't know all of the things that you could look at, And if you don't know how to go through that diagnostic journey, doctor, right? Doctor goes to college, they study biology for 4 years, medicine for 4 years, residency for 3 years, specialty for whatever, for internship, whatever they call it. I don't know, I'm not a doctor. And all of a sudden they're like, they know all of this stuff and they're able to just boom, narrow focus it down into the diagnosis. And the best sales managers that I work with, trained probably 2,000 sales managers in the last few years coming into CoachCRM and with CoachCRM, is they're able to diagnose and prioritize what they're going to coach on by looking at reports, by looking at calls, by looking at calendars, by talking to people, by looking at sales engagement platforms, all this type of stuff. And I've also seen so many managers that are one-trick ponies. And I'm like, how do you coach? And they say Gong. How do you coach? SalesLoft. Like, that's a software product, bro. That's not coaching, you know? And so really being able to diagnose somebody's game and be like, look, you know, if you got better at shipping, you'd shave 10 strokes off your game. Let's work on shipping. Put the driver in the bag. Or somebody that just can't hit the driver in fairway, like, get off the putting green. Let's just focus on getting that thing into play. And if the manager can understand that for each individual on the team, and if they know how to coach each individual on the team, and if they drive accountability coming out of those coaching conversations, they do phenomenally. Otherwise, they end up in this world where they're playing whack-a-mole and they just don't make any progress.
Yeah, I think identifying those skill gaps, but then also delivering the almost individualized coaching based on the rep is what the best managers are able to do.
Yeah.
And it seems like you also just summed up my golf game when you were talking about under the trees and off the buildings. But
you want to play for money? Come on, I'm terrible.
Yeah, I would be the worst.
Cory, I got a question for you. So, like, when you think about if a manager doesn't know what they don't know, right? Using the analogy, hey, I don't know. I didn't know if I put this much energy into learning a bump and run that's going to shave 2 strokes off my handicap.
Yeah.
Right. And they don't know what they don't know. What's your advice to them to even know the right questions to ask? Because I feel like that's part of the problem with first-time leaders is you even know the right questions to ask to get the right information to then diagnose.
Totally. So I'm writing a book on frontline sales managers will be out later this year. Also hiring people like Justin as your coach, going out and getting mentors, identifying if your boss is strong or not. Is your boss strong? Do you think that your boss is somebody that it's somewhat unattainable for you to be at their level? And if the answer to that question is not yes, then you need to go out and find other mentors. You need to figure out. And if you haven't read every book on sales management, and if you haven't read every, David Sachs and Mark Andreessen blog post, not the HubSpot's great, whatever. But their blog posts are written by 23-year-old content marketers. Go read the stuff from the VCs that actually understand this stuff. Go read the stuff from John McMahon and from Mark Cranny and those folks that are just legends in this space. And then go hire a coach to work with that can actually help calibrate that in the context of your world. That's what you got to do. Because if your boss ain't cutting it, if your boss is just a 2-year-old version of you, then they're not helping you get better. That's like being a senior on the junior varsity team.
Well, and to take it a step further, the challenge with that is people can look at like the metrics on paper, they can study that.
Yeah.
But if the manager doesn't know the nuances of how to actually use the data, right? It's like someone, anyone's watched Sandlot, like someone saying, hey, go buy some PF flyers, guaranteed to make you run faster and jump better.
Exactly.
Right? It's like your manager comes to you and says, hey, you need to get better at getting to pain. And you're like, okay, I hear you, but like, how the hell do I do that on my next call? It doesn't help me, right?
Well, that's because the company hasn't rolled out a sales methodology. That's where they either do something silly like roll out medics so the CRO can inspect deals and see if they're real or not, but don't give the team actual tactical ways to ask the questions and move their mouths. So that's the root cause of that. This is the thing, right? It's the root cause analysis. Going back to Toyota 5 Whys, read The Toyota Way by Jeffrey Leiker, one of the best business books in the world. It has nothing to do with sales, but it'll make you think in a way as a manager that can diagnose and prioritize all of this stuff in an amazing way. And then you get to the point where you're like, CFO's yelling at us because our sales cycle is too long and our deal size is not big enough. Well, okay, let's go listen to some calls and see what we're doing in discovery. How are we teeing up the agendas? Are we understanding what they want to uncover? Are we talking about winning zone pain points in that first 10 minutes of that conversation to understand if there's anything for us to solve? We're getting the right stakeholders involved. Are we setting next steps? Are we doing a good job of managing resistance? And when we demos, is the conversation or is it a presentation, show and tell? And all of this stuff. I'm rattling this off because it's literally all I do every day. But if you're not at that point where you can do that, then you got to lift some weights and get there. And out there in the field, it's not, they don't have different divisions. Everybody's on the same playing field. So if somebody else can do it really well and you can't, it's on you to get there. That's my take. I mean, that's real world. Welcome.
Yeah. And you guys have talked about a number of them already, but Steph, I noticed that you've been at several different sales organizations in your professional career. Are there any other obstacles that you've seen that sales teams usually run into when it comes to not being able to, be more productive or to increase their performance? What are some of those that you've seen?
Yeah, I think it varies organization to organization and the specifics of your market and product and everything. But ultimately, I feel that most obstacles and challenges that teams have really are driven by distraction more than anything, where it's like, there's a lot of people out there, whether they're in sales, whether they're in finance, whether they're in marketing. It's like, if they don't come in and know the things that they need to be focused on and need to be working on, they just kind of zone out. It's that overwhelming list of possibility is almost worse than very narrow focus of like, these are the things I need to get done today. And so I think that like focus is first and foremost. Todd Capone, I'm sure people are familiar with him with transparency sale and transparency leadership. He has his 5 F's. Number 1 is focus. Like your team's time is their number 1 asset. That's a finite resource that you're never going to get more of. And if they're not spending their time in the right places, on the right deals, with the right people, like they're really just doing themselves a disservice. And so, especially like when I was earlier on in my career, like I really struggled with not wanting to be like known as like a micromanager or anything like that. And I still definitely don't think that I am. But what I've realized is, more people than not, or more people than you realize, like really do want that structure to their day. And so a few years back, I was managing a team of like pretty junior account executives, and they still had a portion of inbound pipeline that they were responsible for qualifying. They were doing their own sourcing. They were learning how to close deals for the first time. Like the role entailed a lot. And so what I did was I sat down and looked at, all of the different responsibilities of this position and where I thought those percentage breakdowns needed to be in their day. And literally down to the minute, I was like, okay, if 10% of your day should be on social selling, that equals, 42 minutes. And, do I expect it and made like sample day schedules and things like that? And it wasn't never, ever anything where I was like, hey, you have to go and live by this calendar. It was something that it's like, if you come in and you don't necessarily know what you need to be working on, here's some suggestions. And it really helped them because, sometimes just limitless possibilities is the biggest kind of distraction that there can be. And, there's the obvious things too, like making sure as an organization, you've got like a well-defined ICP and well-defined process for who you're working with and who you're talking to. But ultimately, I think it really just comes down to providing the focus and the structure, that people honestly kind of crave.
Yeah, I think we've definitely touched on this a little bit here a few times now. Is how you spend your time and how you prioritize your time. Cory, from your perspective, when it comes to managers and helping their reps prioritize time, have you seen anything tactic-wise that people can take away from this call and implement on their sales team?
Yeah, I love what Steph said. I think the key is to get them to come up with the idea. So when you're coaching somebody, they've got to come up with the idea. If you tell them, then some people do it, some people won't. People that are brand new and junior, they'll do whatever you say. Everybody else will, who knows? So the whole idea is through a series of questions, ask to help them come to the realization that, hey, this time management is a problem. Have them come up with what the time management plan is. You can edit it if you need to, but first of all, if they do it, it's less work for you. And the whole goal of management is do less work. Every time I see the managers like, oh, it's so much work being a manager. I was like, well, tell me what you're doing. It's like, oh, don't need to do that. Don't need to do that. I don't know why you're doing that. Like, delegate this stuff, right? And so get them to come up with what their proposal for their week to look like is. And if you need to edit it, Well, you've already articulated what their goals are, so you can edit it in the context of their goals. So, hey, you said that you're going to do this much, whatever, per week, but your goal is to do that much. I'm curious how you got to that number. And they're going to be like, oh, gee whiz, maybe I should probably spend more time on it. All right, great. So then they come up with it. So that's the first piece. And then the big piece is let them go. Let them go. Let them go for a week. Let them go for 2 weeks. Come back. All right. So a week ago, we committed that this is how we're going to spend our time. How did we do? I don't know. And then you see either they did it and they're being accountable to what they committed to, which is great, which in the interim took 0 minutes from the manager. 2, you saw that, sorry, that's gross. I had a little boating accident yesterday. I caught a 25-pound tree and pulled it up on my anchor, ripped my finger in half. So they come back and they didn't do it, and they realize they didn't do it, and they're like, okay, now I'm going to take it seriously. And as a manager, maybe what you do is you tighten the check-in window. So maybe we don't wait a week now. Maybe we wait 2 days. Maybe we wait 1 day, whatever it is. Or the third way is they come back and they're like, look, this job's just not for me. And in all 3 of those scenarios, you're helping them drive what's going on, and you're preventing burnout. We talked about burnout. Justin saying he loves that burnout's part of the conversation. Who burns out fastest? Managers, because they're sitting there, especially if the companies didn't roll out good sales methodology. And they're trying to coach all these people, and they're like, this one's doing this one's doing that, this one's doing the other, and they're all over the freaking place. And then you're sitting there trying to get people to do something that they're not bought into, because either A, you did the command and control thing and told them what their job is, instead of coaching them and getting them to come up with a proposal that they're bought into. And then B, your accountability framework puts too much of the burden on you, not enough on them. And these are the things that we just, literally spend all my time working with folks to help solve as an organization. Sounds like Justin does it on an individual basis. So we're quite the tag team here. And then Steph does it for her company, so she's crushing it.
I was gonna. Yeah. Is it my understanding right? So if somebody wanted to improve their productivity, they should list out their revenue generating activities, basically, and then either from an individual contributor or from a manager doing it for their team, and then basically prioritize those against time. Is that the way I'm understanding the conversation? If I were to summarize it up a little bit.
I'll let them say, because that's not exactly what I'm saying. But what do y'all think? Or do you want me to go?
I mean, what I would say when I did it, or when I was at my last company, once a quarter, we actually audited our calendars, and we actually looked at it down to that level of, how much time are we actually spending focusing on the most important things? Because calendar creep is real. So that's like a tactical thing that we actually did to audit this on a quarterly basis. But Cory was hitting on something a little different. But to answer your question directly, Ross, that's how we did it.
I mean, the only salespeople can only control 2 things. They can control their quality of activity and their quantity of activity. That's it, right? So I think the calendar thing takes care of the quantity piece. It doesn't touch on the quality piece. And this is where I was going back to the golf analogy, where if you want to improve productivity, you've got to get the managers equipped to diagnose what is the biggest opportunity for these people. And then of those big opportunities, what are the things that are going to take forever? So if you got somebody that has just got their first sales job ever, run an enterprise deal, that's going to take forever. So long tail. But if every one of their demos is a 90% talk time presentation and they're not asking any questions, or they're asking, does that make sense, instead of how would you use something like this inside of your company, that's something that you can fix in an hour. So what are the big opportunities? What are the quick wins? Getting the manager super equipped to diagnose. That helps on the quality side of the equation. Man, we're doing heavy math today. Steph, you started this. And so that starts on the quality side of the equation. On the quantity side of the equation, I think the calendar is a good place to use as an anchor.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it: the quality versus the quantity, and then both sides of those equations. It's a good way to wrap it.
And if you're a manager and your executives aren't talking like I am right now, and this is just like how I operate, if they're not taking everything and trying to tie it back to a simple framework, like they can only control 2 things, quality and quantity. If your leaders, senior leaders, VPs, CROs aren't doing that, you need to go find somebody else to mentor you in your career, because otherwise you're just going to be a carbon copy of them. And go look at their LinkedIn page. Are they sticking with the places? Are their teams following them place to place? Are CEOs recruiting them to come be CROs, VPs? Many of them are. Some of them are not. So you can only have one job at once for the most part. So like, just put a lot of effort into really doing your diligence on who you're following as you're developing those leadership skills. Because if you go down that wrong path, you're just going to get off into la la land.
Yeah, I feel like that's pretty easy to do, and I think that's an important period to put on the end of this conversation. But before we wrap it up totally here, Cory, did you want to disclose the offer that you alluded to at the beginning?
Oh yeah, so we published our 6th book, The 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach, in 2020, and created a 90-minute course that teaches people sales coaching frameworks for 60 minutes of instruction. Last 30 minutes is role play, and we sell it for $500, but now that we got a software company, we give it away for free. So if you want to check it out, email me freestuff@coachcrm.com, freestuff@coachcrm.com, and I'll hook you up with a coupon code to that course.
Awesome. And Steph, Justin, if anybody listening wants to follow up with you for either more clarification on something you shared or just to follow your thought leadership, what's the best way for them to reach you? Steph, we'll start with you.
LinkedIn, I'm just Stephanie Sanders at Contractbook on there. And then email as well is pretty simple. It's just sds@contractbook.com. And appreciate all you guys joining us today. This was a fun combo.
Cool. And Justin?
All the social media platforms, my name spelled out, Justin J. Johnson, fully, you'll find me. Email jjj@justinjjohnson.com. Lots of J's there. Our website, justinjjohnson.com. Go figure.
Consistent across all. It keeps it easy. Nice. Well, thank you all for sharing, and for those who attended, great conversation, and we'll see you on the next panel for those sticking around. And thank you again. See you.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, y'all.
Yep.